1. The early morning traffic in downtown Chicago moved at a snail's pace as Dr. Maya Thompson gripped her steering wheel, trying to breathe through another intense contraction. Her perfectly ironed blue scrubs were already damp with sweat, and her usually neat braids were coming undone. At 38 weeks pregnant, she hadn't expected her water to break during her morning rounds at a different hospital. "Just breathe, Maya. I'm right here," her younger sister Zara said from the passenger seat, her hand squeezing Maya's shoulder. "Maybe I should drive." Maya shook her head, her dark eyes focused on the road. "We're almost at St. Mary's. I can make it." As a cardiac surgeon, she was used to staying calm under pressure, but this pain was different. It felt like her insides were being twisted into knots. The familiar white building of St. Mary's Hospital came into view. Maya had performed countless surgeries here, but today she would be the patient. Her husband, James, the hospital's CEO and majority stakeholder, was stuck in traffic coming from a morning meeting across town. "I called James again," Zara said, scrolling through her phone. "He's about 40 minutes away. The accident on Lakeshore Drive has everything backed up." Maya nodded, too focused on parking her car to respond. Another contraction hit her as she pulled into the emergency entrance, this one stronger than the last. She couldn't help but let out a small cry of pain. The sisters made their way to the labor and delivery floor, with Zara carrying Maya's hastily packed hospital bag. The familiar faces of hospital staff looked at Maya with surprise. They were used to seeing her in her white coat, confidently striding through the halls, not doubled over in pain. "Dr. Thompson, we weren't expecting you for another 2 weeks," Sarah, the receptionist, exclaimed. She quickly began typing into her computer. "Let's get you checked in right away." Maya tried to smile through another contraction. The baby had other plans. The admission process went quickly, given Maya's status at the hospital. Within minutes, she was changed into a hospital gown and settled into one of the private delivery rooms. The monitoring equipment beeped steadily, recording her contractions and the baby's heartbeat. "Your primary OB, Dr. Williams, is in surgery right now," a young resident informed them. "But we paged her. In the meantime, Nurse Winters will be taking care of you." Nurse Karen Winters walked into the room, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, her blue eyes scanning the chart in her hands. Her lips pursed slightly as she looked up at Maya, an expression that didn't go unnoticed by Zara. "So, we're having some discomfort, are we?" Nurse Winters asked, her tone notably different from the warm greetings Maya usually received at the hospital. "The contractions are about 4 minutes apart," Maya managed to say between controlled breaths, "and my pain level is around an 8. Nurse Winters raised an eyebrow. "An 8? Well, that seems a bit excessive for early labor. First-time moms tend to exaggerate their pain levels." Maya, despite her professional status and medical knowledge, felt herself being dismissed. She watched as the nurse casually checked the monitors, making notes without any sense of urgency. "I'd like to request an epidural," Maya said firmly, her medical training telling her it was the right time. "Oh, honey, you're barely dilated," Nurse Winters replied with a condescending smile. "Let's not jump the gun. Some women just have a lower pain tolerance than others." Zara's eyes narrowed at the nurse's tone. She pulled out her phone and started recording discreetly, her instincts telling her something wasn't right about this situation. Another contraction ripped through Maya's body, stronger than any before. She gripped the bed rails, her knuckles turning white. "Please," she gasped, "I need something for the pain." "All in good time," Nurse Winters responded dismissively. "Why don't we wait a bit? You people tend to rush things." The racist undertone in the nurse's comment hung heavy in the air. Zara's hand tightened around her phone, while Maya, despite her pain, felt a familiar sting that had nothing to do with her contractions. Neither woman knew that James Thompson was about to walk into a situation that would change St. Mary's Hospital forever. The next hour in room 304 became increasingly tense. Nurse Winters moved through her duties with an air of indifference, checking Maya's vitals with minimal communication and responding to questions with short, dismissive answers. "I don't understand," Maya whispered to Zara during one of her brief moments between contractions. "I've seen hundreds of patients receive better care than this." Her medical knowledge only made the situation more frustrating. She knew exactly what care she should be receiving. Zara continued recording on her phone, capturing Nurse Winter's behavior. The nurse had already made 3 more subtle but pointed comments about certain patients being dramatic and not handling pain well. "Your blood pressure is a bit elevated," Nurse Winters announced, looking at the monitor. "That's what happens when you get yourself all worked up." Maya, still breathing through her pain, tried to maintain her professional composure. "As a doctor, I'm aware that elevated blood pressure during labor can indicate." "Oh, sweetie," Nurse Winters cut her off. "Being a doctor doesn't make you an expert in labor and delivery. That's our specialty." She adjusted Maya's IV with unnecessary roughness. "Besides, I've been doing this for 20 years. I know when someone is just being sensitive." Dr. Sarah Chen, a young resident who had worked with Maya on several cardiac cases, poked her head into the room. She frowned at Maya's obvious distress. "Is everything okay in here?" "Dr. Thompson, you don't look comfortable." Before Maya could respond, Nurse Winters stepped between them. "Everything's under control, Dr. Chen. Just a typical first-time mother adjusting to real labor pain." Dr. Chen hesitated, clearly torn between respecting the senior nurse's authority and her concern for Maya. "Maybe we should check her cervix again. The monitor shows her contractions are intensifying." "I'll do the checks when they're necessary," Nurse Winters replied coldly. "Don't you have rounds to complete?" After Dr. Chen left, Zara couldn't contain herself any longer. "This is ridiculous. My sister is clearly in severe pain. She needs an epidural." "Listen here," Nurse Winters turned to Zara, her voice sharp. "I don't need family members telling me how to do my job. If you keep interfering, I'll have to ask you to leave." Maya gripped the bed rails as another powerful contraction hit. The pain was becoming unbearable, and she could feel something wasn't right. The monitor beside her bed showed her contractions were now coming every 2 minutes. "Please," Maya managed between gasps. "Something's wrong. The pressure. It's different." Her medical training was screaming at her that this wasn't normal progression for early labor. Nurse Winters barely glanced at the monitor. "Nothing's wrong except your attitude. You're barely at 4 centimeters. First-time mothers like you always think you're further along than you are." Just then, Dr. Lisa Williams, Maya's OB-GYN, burst into the room, still wearing her surgical cap. "Maya, I came as soon as my surgery finished. How are you doing?" Before anyone could answer, Maya's monitors started alarming. Her blood pressure had spiked dangerously high, and the baby's heart rate was showing signs of distress. "Why wasn't I called earlier?" Dr. Williams demanded, quickly examining Maya. "She's fully dilated, and the baby's in distress." She turned to Nurse Winters, her face furious. "How long has she been asking for pain management?" "She was fine," Nurse Winters defended weakly. "Just being a bit dramatic about normal labor pain." "Get me an anesthesiologist stat," Dr. Williams ordered another nurse who had rushed in, "and page Dr. Martinez for a possible emergency C-section." The room suddenly burst into activity. Nurse Winters stood against the wall, her face pale as she watched the medical team spring into action. She jumped when her phone buzzed, a message from the nurses' station informing all staff that CDO James Thompson had just arrived at the hospital. Zara, still recording, looked at the nurse with cold eyes. "You better pray my sister and her baby are okay, because when her husband gets here..." "Her husband?" Nurse Winters interrupted, still clutching her phone. "Yes, James Thompson, the CDO of this hospital." Zara's voice was deadly quiet. "The man who signs your paychecks and whose wife you've been ignoring for the past hour." The color drained from Nurse Winters' face as the implications of her actions began to sink in. Outside the room, they could hear the rapid footsteps of someone running down the hall. James Thompson's tall figure filled the doorway of room 304, his usually composed demeanor shattered by the sight before him. His wife Maya lay on the hospital bed, surrounded by medical staff working urgently to stabilize her condition. The sound of multiple medical monitors beeping filled the air. "What's happening?" James demanded, rushing to Maya's side. His normally neat suit was wrinkled, and his tie hung loose around his neck from running through the hospital halls. Dr. Williams spoke while continuing her examination. "The baby's in distress, James. Maya's blood pressure is dangerously high, and we're prepping for an emergency C-section." James grabbed Maya's hand, his face twisted with concern. "Why wasn't I called earlier about her condition?" Because some people thought your wife was exaggerating her pain. Zara stepped forward, her phone still recording. Showing the footage, or should I? Nurse Winters, who had been trying to blend into the background, attempted to slip out of the room. James's voice stopped her cold. Don't move, nurse. He glanced at her ID badge. Winters. I want to see exactly what's been happening here. Zara quickly played the video she'd recorded. The room fell silent except for Maya's labored breathing and the beeping monitors as they all watched the footage of Nurse Winters dismissing Maya's pain, making racially charged comments, and ignoring clear signs of distress. James's face darkened with each passing second. As CEO, he had implemented numerous policies to prevent exactly this type of discrimination, yet here it was, happening to his own wife. Dr. Martinez is here, a resident announced, rushing into the already crowded room. We need to move now, Dr. Martinez said, quickly assessing the situation. Her blood pressure is still climbing, and the baby's heart rate is dropping. As they prepared to move Maya to the operating room, James turned to face Nurse Winters, who had pressed herself against the wall. You'll be dealing with me later, he said, his voice cold and professional. For now, you're suspended, effective immediately. Security will escort you out. Mr. Thompson, I didn't know she was your wife, Nurse Winters stammered, her face pale. I would have. You would have what? James cut her off. Treated her like a human being. Given her the same care you give your white patients? The fact that she's my wife shouldn't matter. Every patient deserves respect and proper medical attention. Maya's voice, weak but clear, interrupted the confrontation. James, the baby. James immediately returned to his wife's side, taking her hand as the medical team began to move her bed. I'm here, love. Everything's going to be okay. Dr. Williams turned to James as they rushed toward the operating room. We need to move fast. The baby's heart rate keeps dropping, and Maya's blood pressure isn't responding to medication. Security arrived to handle Nurse Winters, who had begun crying, claiming she never meant any harm. Her protests fell on deaf ears as she was escorted out of the maternity ward. In the hallway, other hospital staff watched in shock as they recognized their CEO running alongside his wife's hospital bed. Many had worked with Maya in surgery, but had never imagined seeing the brilliant cardiac surgeon in such a vulnerable position. I need you to stay strong for me, James told Maya as they reached the operating room doors. I'll be right here waiting. Don't let this happen to anyone else, Maya managed to say before another contraction hit. Promise me. James kissed her forehead, his eyes filled with determination. I promise. This ends today. As the medical team took Maya into surgery, James turned to Zara, who was still clutching her phone. Send me that video. Every second of it. Already done, Zara replied. I've also sent it to our family lawyer. James nodded, his mind already racing with the changes he would implement. This incident would become a catalyst for major reforms at St. Mary's Hospital. But first, he had to focus on Maya and their baby. A young nurse approached them hesitantly. Mr. Thompson, we prepared a private waiting area for you and Ms. Zara. As they followed the nurse, James could hear the hospital gossip machine already working overtime. By tomorrow, everyone would know what had happened in room 304 and how Nurse Winters' racial bias had nearly cost them the lives of both the prominent doctor and the CEO's child. The next few hours would change everything at St. Mary's Hospital, but for now, all James could do was wait and pray for his wife and unborn child. The surgical waiting room felt suffocating despite its spacious design. James paced back and forth while Zara sat rigidly in one of the plush chairs, both of them jumping every time the door opened. It had been 45 minutes since Maya was rushed into surgery. Meanwhile, news of the incident spread through the hospital like wildfire. Nurses and doctors who had worked with Maya gathered near the surgical floor, their faces showing concern and anger of what had transpired. Dr. Chen, the young resident who had tried to intervene earlier, approached James with tears in her eyes. Mr. Thompson, I should have done more. I knew something wasn't right when I checked on Dr. Thompson, but I let Nurse Winters intimidate me. James stopped his pacing. This isn't your fault, Dr. Chen. The system failed today, and I'm partly responsible. I should have made sure our anti-discrimination policies had real teeth. The door opened again, and this time Dr. Williams emerged, still in her surgical scrubs. James and Zara rushed toward her. "They're both stable," Dr. Williams announced before they could ask. "Maya's blood pressure has finally responded to medication, and your daughter has strong lungs. She's already made that very clear to everyone in the operating room." The tension in James's shoulders released slightly. "When can I see them?" "They're moving Maya to recovery now. The baby is being checked in the NICU as a precaution, but her initial tests look good." Dr. Williams's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "James, if we hadn't caught this when we did." "I know," James said quietly. "Believe me, I know." While they waited to see Maya, the hospital's administrative machine had already begun moving. The chief of medicine, Dr. Patricia Reynolds, arrived looking grave. "I've reviewed the video," she told James. "We're launching a full investigation into all of Nurse Winter's past cases, particularly involving minority patients. We've already received 3 calls from other patients reporting similar experiences." James nodded, his jaw tight. "I want a complete overhaul of our complaints system. Obviously, people have been trying to tell us about this problem, but we weren't listening." A nurse appeared to escort them to the recovery room. Maya lay propped up in bed, looking exhausted but alert. Her dark skin was still pale from the ordeal, but her eyes lit up when she saw James. "Where is she?" Maya asked immediately. "They're bringing her down from the NICU now," James assured her, taking her hand. "Dr. Williams says she's perfect." Moments later, a nurse wheeled in a small bassinet. Inside lay a tiny bundle with a head full of dark curls. The nurse carefully placed the baby in Maya's arms. "Hello, Olivia," Maya whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You certainly know how to make an entrance." James sat on the edge of the bed, wrapping his arm around his wife and daughter. For a moment, they forgot about everything else. The discrimination, the danger, the upcoming storm. They were just a family meeting for the first time. But reality couldn't be held at bay for long. Dr. Reynolds entered the room, followed by the hospital's legal counsel. "Maya," Dr. Reynolds began gently, "we're going to need your statement about what happened. The medical board has already been notified, and Nurse Winters' license is under review." Maya looked down at her daughter, then back at the hospital officials. "This can't just be about one nurse. The whole system needs to change. How many other women have gone through this without a CEO husband to protect them? How many didn't have someone recording the abuse?" James squeezed her shoulder. "I've already started making calls. We're bringing in external consultants to review every aspect of patient care with a focus on racial bias. New training programs, new oversight committees, new reporting systems, whatever it takes." "And this time," Zara added from where she stood by the window, "we're making sure the changes stick. I'm posting that video online. People need to see what really happens in hospitals to Black women." Maya nodded, cradling Olivia closer. "Do it. But first, send it to every hospital board member. I want them to see exactly what their current policies allowed to happen." As the afternoon sun streamed through the hospital window, the Thompson family knew this was just the beginning. Their traumatic experience would become a turning point for St. Mary's Hospital, forcing long overdue changes in how the medical system treated patients of color. Baby Olivia slept peacefully, unaware that her dramatic arrival would help protect countless other mothers and babies in the future. 3 days after Olivia's birth, the Thompson family's story exploded across social media. Zara's video, showing Nurse Winters' treatment of Maya, had gone viral overnight. News vans lined up outside St. Mary's Hospital, and reporters clamored for statements from hospital administration. Inside Maya's private hospital room, now guarded by security to keep reporters away, James sat reviewing the hundreds of emails flooding his inbox. Many were from other women sharing similar experiences, not just at St. Mary's but at hospitals across the country. "Listen to this one," James said to Maya, who was feeding Olivia. "A woman in Atlanta went through almost the exact same thing last month. Her baby didn't make it." His voice cracked with emotion. Maya looked down at Olivia, her heart heavy. "That could have been us, James, if Dr. Williams hadn't come when she did." A knock on the door interrupted them. Dr. Reynolds entered with a thick folder in her hands, her face grim. "We've completed our initial review of Nurse Winters' past cases," she announced. "It's worse than we thought. Over the past 5 years, there have been 27 formal complaints filed against her, all from women of color. Every single one was dismissed as unsubstantiated. James stood up, his face darkening. How did this get past our review board? Because the review board never saw them, Dr. Reynolds replied. We found that complaints against certain staff members were being filtered before reaching the board. Nurse Winters had protection from someone in administration. The revelation hung heavy in the air. Maya shifted Olivia to her shoulder, patting her back gently. Who? Robert Maxwell, our former head of human resources, Dr. Reynolds said. He retired last year, but we found emails showing he systematically buried complaints about several nurses and doctors, all involving racial discrimination. James began pacing the room, his mind racing. We need to reopen every single one of those complaints. Contact all the patients involved. Offer them whatever support they need. Medical care, counseling, legal assistance. Already started, Dr. Reynolds nodded. But there's more. The medical board investigation into Nurse Winters revealed she's been floating between 3 different hospitals in the state. She was asked to resign from both previous positions after similar incidents. Maya's medical training kicked in. They let her resign instead of reporting her. That's how these cycles continue. No one wants to be the one to end someone's career, so they pass the problem along to the next hospital. A soft knock interrupted them. Zara entered with her laptop. You need to see this. The video has over 5 million views now, and women are organizing protests outside hospitals in 12 different cities. They're calling it the #BelieveHerPain movement. James moved to Maya's side, watching their daughter sleep peacefully against her mother's shoulder. This is bigger than just St. Mary's now. We have a responsibility to make real change. I want to speak at the board meeting tomorrow, Maya declared. Not just as your wife or as a doctor, but as a black woman who nearly lost her baby because of systemic racism in our own hospital. Dr. Reynolds smiled. The board won't know what hit them. But Maya, are you sure you're strong enough? You just had major surgery. That's exactly why I need to do this now, Maya replied firmly. While the pain and fear are still fresh, they need to understand what their policies, or lack of them, did to me and my baby. James took out his phone. I'll call a press conference for after the board meeting. It's time we take a public stand. As they discussed plans for the next day, another nurse came in to check Maya's vitals. The young woman, a recent hire named Sarah, was noticeably more attentive and careful in her treatment than before the incident. Your blood pressure is much better today, Dr. Thompson, Sarah said, documenting everything meticulously. Is there anything else you need? Maya shook her head, noting how the hospital staff's behavior had shifted since the video went public. Fear of consequences shouldn't be what drives good patient care, she thought. They needed to address the root of the problem. As the sun set outside her hospital window, Maya held her daughter close, thinking about all the mothers who hadn't been as fortunate as she was. Tomorrow would be just the beginning of a long fight for change, but with Olivia in her arms and James by her side, she felt ready for the battle ahead. The story of what happened in room 304 would become a catalyst for reform, not just at St. Mary's, but in hospitals across the country. The hospital boardroom had never been so crowded. Every seat was filled, with additional chairs brought in to accommodate all the attendees. The usual monthly meeting had transformed into something historic. Maya sat at the front of the room, Olivia sleeping peacefully in her arms. Despite still recovering from her C-section, she sat straight-backed and determined. James stood beside her, one hand on her shoulder, facing the board members seated across the long mahogany table. Before we begin, James announced, his voice firm, I want to make it clear that I'm not speaking as your CEO today. I'm speaking as the husband of a woman who nearly lost her life in our hospital, and as the father of a child who could have died because of our failures. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Many had watched Zara's video, which had now reached 10 million views and sparked nationwide protests. Maya handed Olivia to Zara and slowly stood up. 3 days ago, I came to this hospital as a patient. Not as Dr. Thompson, the cardiac surgeon, not as Mrs. Thompson, the CEO's wife, but as a black woman in pain. And what happened to me happens every day to women who don't have my privileges or connections. She opened a folder containing printed emails. Since our story went public, we've received over 1,000 messages from women sharing similar experiences. Let me read you some of them. For the next 15 minutes, Maya read testimonials from women who had been dismissed, ignored, and discriminated against in hospitals across the country. The room grew increasingly tense with each story. "This stops today," James declared when Maya finished. "I prepared a comprehensive reform plan. It's not a suggestion, it's happening. Anyone who doesn't support these changes can submit their resignation." Dr. Reynolds stepped forward with packets for each board member. The plan includes mandatory bias training for all staff, new oversight committees led by community members, and a complete restructuring of our complaint system. We're also establishing a patient advocacy program specifically focused on maternal care for women of color. One of the older board members raised his hand. "These changes will be expensive. The shareholders will understand that lawsuits and bad publicity are more expensive," James interrupted. "And if they don't, they can sell their shares. We're a hospital first, a business second." Maya walked slowly to the center of the room. "I almost died in this hospital. My daughter almost died. Not because of a complicated medical condition, but because someone decided my pain didn't matter. How many women haven't been as lucky as I was?" The room fell silent. "The press is waiting outside," Zara announced, checking her phone. "The protest crowd has grown to over 1,000 people." James nodded. "Good. Maya will make the announcement about our reforms. The people need to hear it from her." As the meeting concluded, board members approached Maya one by one, offering apologies and support for the changes. Some seemed genuine, others merely political, but all understood that St. Mary's Hospital would never be the same. Outside, Maya faced the crowd of protesters and reporters, Olivia cradled in one arm while James supported her other side. Camera flashes went off as she began to speak. "What happened to me was not unique. It happens every day to women who look like me. Today, we're taking the first steps to change that. St. Mary's Hospital is implementing immediate reforms to address racial bias in medical care." The crowd cheered as she outlined the changes. Protesters held signs reading "Believe Her Pain" and "Black Mothers Matter." Among them, Maya spotted several nurses and doctors from the hospital, including Dr. Chen, showing their support. As Maya finished her speech, a young pregnant black woman in the crowd called out, "Will these changes really make a difference?" Maya looked directly at her. "They have to, because next time it could be you in that delivery room, and your life matters just as much as mine." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. Later that evening, as news channels replayed Maya's speech and social media exploded with support, the Thompson family sat quietly in Maya's hospital room. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more resistance to change, more battles to fight. But today, they had taken the first step toward making sure what happened in room 304 never happened again. Olivia stirred in her sleep, unaware that her difficult entry into the world had sparked a movement that would protect countless mothers and babies to come. 2 weeks after Maya and Olivia left the hospital, St. Mary's transformation was in full swing. The once quiet hallways buzzed with activity as new patient advocates made their rounds, wearing bright blue badges that identified them as part of the newly formed maternal care protection team. In his office, James reviewed the latest report with Dr. Reynolds. The investigation into past complaints had uncovered over 200 cases of potential discrimination, spanning the last decade. "The medical board has officially revoked Nurse Winters' license," Dr. Reynolds announced, placing a document on James's desk. "And 3 other nurses have been suspended pending investigation." James nodded, his expression grim. "What about the families affected?" "Our legal team has reached out to all of them. We're offering settlements and free medical care, but many just want acknowledgement of what happened to them." She paused. "And Maya's patient advocacy program is already making a difference." Down in the maternity ward, the changes were visible. New posters lined the walls, showing diverse faces and promoting patient rights. Each room now had a tablet where patients could directly report their pain levels and concerns to multiple staff members simultaneously. Maya, working from home while recovering, had designed much of the new system herself. She sat in Olivia's nursery, participating in a video conference with hospital administrators across the country who wanted to implement similar changes. "The key is accountability," Maya explained to the faces on her laptop screen. "Every complaint must be logged, tracked, and reviewed by multiple parties. No single person can dismiss a patient's concerns." Zara, who had temporarily moved in to help with Olivia, entered with a fresh cup of tea. "You won't believe this," she said, showing Maya her phone. "The video just hit 20 million views. Women are using it to advocate for better care in hospitals worldwide." Maya smiled tiredly. The past 2 weeks had been exhausting but fulfilling. Every day brought new stories of women feeling empowered to speak up about their experiences, and hospitals being forced to listen. At St. Mary's, the culture shift was becoming evident. Staff members who had previously stayed silent about discriminatory practices now felt safe reporting concerns. The hospital had hired more doctors and nurses of color, and patient satisfaction scores were already showing improvement. That afternoon, James came home early, carrying a stack of letters. "These came to the hospital today," he said, handing them to Maya. "They're from patients who were treated by Nurse Winters." Maya read through the letters, tears forming in her eyes. Women shared stories of dismissal, pain, and loss, but they also expressed hope that things were finally changing. "We're making a difference," Maya whispered, looking down at Olivia sleeping in her bassinet. "But we have so much more to do." The family's peaceful moment was interrupted by a call from Dr. Reynolds. A reporter from a major news network wanted to do a feature story on the changes at St. Mary's, focusing on Maya's experience and the reforms it sparked. "Should we do it?" James asked Maya. Maya thought about all the women who had reached out to her, all the stories still untold. Yes, the more attention this gets, the harder it will be for other hospitals to ignore the problem. Later that evening, as Maya prepared for Olivia's feeding, she received a text from Dr. Chen. A pregnant woman had just been admitted to the maternity ward, scared because of previous bad experiences at other hospitals. The new protocols had immediately flagged her case for special attention, and she was already being supported by a patient advocate. "That's why we're doing this," Maya told Olivia as she rocked her. "So every mother and baby gets the care they deserve." The reforms at St. Mary's were just the beginning. Across the country, other hospitals were starting to examine their own practices, forced to confront the reality of medical racism that Maya's story had exposed. The incident in room 304 had started as a personal tragedy but had grown into something much larger, a movement for change in maternal health care. As Maya held her daughter close, she knew that their experience would help protect future generations of mothers and babies. The story wasn't over, but its impact was already changing lives, one delivery room at a time. 1 year after the incident that changed St. Mary's Hospital forever, Maya stood at a podium in the hospital's newly renovated conference center. The room was filled with medical professionals, activists, and journalists from across the country. "Welcome to the first National Conference on Equality in Maternal Care," Maya began, her voice strong and clear. Baby Olivia, now a toddler, sat in James's lap in the front row, playing with her father's tie. The changes that had started at St. Mary's had sparked a nationwide movement. Over the past year, 200 hospitals had adopted similar reform programs. Maya's story had become a case study in medical schools, teaching future doctors about the devastating impact of racial bias in healthcare. "1 year ago, I almost lost my life in this hospital," Maya continued. "Today, I'm proud to say that not a single similar incident has occurred here since we implemented our new protocols. But more importantly, maternal mortality rates for women of color at St. Mary's have dropped by 60%. The audience broke into applause. Among them sat several mothers who had been treated at St. Mary's under the old system. They had become vocal advocates for change, sharing their stories to push for reforms at other hospitals. Dr. Reynolds stood to present the data. The hospital's new policies have become a model for healthcare institutions nationwide. Patient advocates now walk the halls of hundreds of hospitals, ensuring that every woman's voice was heard. "But our work isn't finished," James added, joining Maya at the podium. "Today, we're announcing the creation of the Thompson Foundation for Maternal Health Equity. We're committing $50 million to help other hospitals implement similar changes." In the audience, Zara smiled proudly. Her viral video had grown into a full-scale documentary about maternal health care discrimination, which had won several awards and sparked congressional hearings on the issue. After the conference, Maya walked through the maternity ward where everything had started. Room 304 had been transformed into a training center where staff learned about bias recognition and cultural competency. The walls now displayed artwork celebrating diverse families and their birth stories. A young nurse approached Maya, holding a tablet with the patient care tracking system Maya had helped design. Dr. Thompson, we just admitted a high-risk patient. The system automatically flagged her case for extra monitoring, and a patient advocate is already with her. Maya nodded with satisfaction. The systems they had put in place were working, protecting mothers and babies every day. What had started as a terrible experience had transformed into a force for positive change. That evening, the Thompson family gathered at home to celebrate Olivia's first birthday. As Maya watched her daughter toddle around the living room, she thought about all the babies who would be born into a better healthcare system because of what had happened in room 304. Nurse Winters sent a letter, James said quietly, holding out an envelope. She's completed a comprehensive bias training program and wants to speak at medical conferences about her journey to understanding her prejudices. Maya took the letter, remembering the fear and anger of that day a year ago. People can change, she said, but systems must change first. The evening news played softly in the background, showing footage of protests outside hospitals in other cities still fighting for reform. The movement they had started continued to grow. "Mama," Olivia called out, holding up her arms to Maya. As she lifted her daughter, Maya felt grateful for how their story had turned out, but her heart still ached for all the mothers who hadn't been as fortunate. "We'll keep fighting," she whispered to Olivia, "until every mother gets the care she deserves." The setting sun cast a warm glow through the windows as the family celebrated not just Olivia's birthday, but the countless lives that would be saved by the changes their experience had inspired. What had begun as one mother's nightmare had become a beacon of hope for maternal health care reform across the nation. Room 304 would forever be remembered not as a place of trauma, but as the birthplace of a movement that transformed how hospitals cared for all mothers, regardless of their race. And baby Olivia, whose dramatic entry into the world had sparked it all, would grow up knowing that her birth had helped make the world a little bit better for everyone. The end.